Author, columnist, managing editor of LibertyNation.com, podcast host and conservative policy advocate.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
President Joe Biden says he's definitely running in 2024, and former President Trump appears to be outpolling Biden in 5 crucial swing states. Is America ready for 2 presidents to go head-to-head in electoral battle? Well, one thing's for sure, the media have already made up their minds. But is it all one big fake-out? In this age of theatrics and posturing, we have to wonder just how much of what we see is true determination versus spin and game theory. And on this week's episode, we'll be figuring the odds and peeking behind the political curtain to determine just that. Welcome to Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. On today's show, we're looking into Biden's debacle on soaring gas prices, the twisting macabre that is the 2024 presidential election, constitutional sanctuary cities, and the issue of a crippled justice system, plus a whole lot more. I'd like to say a special hello to our listeners on KQDI on 1450 AM and 97.5 FM out of Great Falls, Montana. We really appreciate you. Remember, this show is proudly sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. Is anyone ready to believe that Joe Biden is seriously considering running for office again in 2024? Well, he says he is, and so does Jen Psaki. But is it all just smoke and mirrors to avoid an early exit from the White House and leave a deeply unpopular Kamala Harris fighting for a Democrat win when Americans go to the polls? And what of former President Donald Trump? Where does he fall in all this? Well, to answer these questions, we're joined by longtime host of Liberty Nation Radio and senior political analyst over at LibertyNation.com, Mr. Tim Donner. Welcome back, Tim.
Always a pleasure, Mark.
So tell me, does anyone really believe that Joe Biden is going to run for office again in 2024? Or is it all just a ploy for continuity in the 2022 midterms?
Well, imagine if they said, on the other hand, that he's not running. I mean, imagine the firestorm that it would create. Even though it wouldn't be surprising to anybody that's paying attention to his cognitive decline, which is there for all the world to see, they couldn't see it during the campaign because he was hidden in a basement. But they can certainly see it now, and it's extremely damaging that they've made a deal with the devil. They put in a guy who is way past his prime to be generous, and a woman who is deeply unpopular to the point that she couldn't even make it into the first primary in her own presidential run. And yet they have to say that he's running again in 2024, I think, Mark, for the sake of stability. I mean, what does it say if he does run again? I mean, what statement does it make about the Democratic Party that they can't find anybody other than an 82-year-old relic to represent their party? Well, what does it say if he doesn't run? It says that he shouldn't be president. You know, most presidents, Mark, they want to have an 8-year legacy. Biden is a placeholder, but he can't admit it. He's got time to recover from this deep hole that he's in, but not much. And the social welfare bill he's trying to pass is less and less popular with each passing day and each rising tick in inflation. So he's in a terrible spot, and nevertheless, he has to, for the sake of stability, say 2024, sure, I'm in. Why wouldn't I be?
Speaking of that inflation, Janet Yellen, in all her predictive brilliance, said that it should be over by the midterms. What a coincidence.
Right. Well, so the markets certainly respect impending elections, Mark.
Absolutely, absolutely. So speaking of Kamala Harris, now, the smart money is still on her for being the nominee in 2024, at least according to the betting odds, because, as you point out, to do otherwise would show that, initially, that making her the vice president in the first place was a major mistake, likely driven by, let's call it, race-based ideology. Now, are Democrats in for a tough time after the midterms, trying to extricate themselves from this situation and from this deal with the devil they've made with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris?
Well, Kamala Harris is at an all-time, I believe, all-time record low approval for vice president. I mean, she makes Biden look popular by contrast. She's at about 28%. He's in the 35 to 40% range. But the good news for Kamala, Mark, is there's nobody else. By default, she is the front runner for 2024 because most of the other people that ran like her to either disgrace themselves or devalued their political currency. People like Elizabeth Warren, Amy Klobuchar, Cory Booker, Julian Castro, these people went down and out. They devalued themselves to the point where they're not going to be taken seriously in 2024 because of their performance in 2020. So who else is there? Pete Buttigieg, I guess. He certainly doesn't seem sort of presidential timber, if you know what I mean. He's a meat.
Well, if he fixes those racist roads that we're all driving on, you know.
Yeah, well, you know, I suppose that's the best they've got right now. But I'll still go back to Gavin Newsom. I think the California governor is lurking in the shadows, ready to pounce on what's sure to be an incredibly weak field in 2024. Mark.
Do you think that'll be a wide field like they had in 2020, or do you think it will be down to just a few serious contenders?
I think a few serious contenders because there really isn't anybody else who has established themselves as ready for prime time. I mean, it's the years when Obama was president that's coming back to haunt them, Mark, because while he won 2 resounding victories for president, his party lost over 1,000 seats across the country in state and local and even federal positions. And it weakened their bench to the point where what you're seeing now is that someone like Kamala Harris is seen as a default candidate, even though she's wildly unpopular and proven totally unable to connect with ordinary people.
Now, speaking of those who are ready for the primetime slots, well, there's President Trump. And now he's been playing his cards very close to his chest regarding the 2024 gambit. And we're assuming that at some point after 2022, perhaps within a day, depending on how the results come in, that he'll be throwing his hat in the ring. But there's some recent shadow polling in 5 key states that these states went to Biden in 2020. And it suggests that this would be a clean sweep for the Donald. What do you make of that?
Well, I think people are at a point where they like what they don't have. They liked Biden because it wasn't Trump. It's hard to say, but I wouldn't characterize that Donald as playing his cards close to the vest, Mark. I think he's been very transparent. I think it's only for the purposes of the many things that happen once you are a declared candidate that he doesn't want happening yet, that he hasn't jumped right back in. And I think, look, if January 6th hadn't happened, I think that Donald Trump would be a clear front runner to win a second term in 2024. But the big unknown is how people really feel about January 6th and how they will feel when they are inevitably bombarded with 24/7, 365 footage of the January 6th insurrection and Capitol riot. How will people react to it?
Well, we'll be covering how that turns out. Now, quick fire answer from you, Tim. If Donald Trump runs in 2024, and if, beyond all belief, Joe Biden does as well, current president versus former president, who's going to win?
Well, first of all, I don't think there's any chance that Biden's going to run again. But if they go head to head again, I'd have to give it to Trump because I think that people are looking at the results of Trump versus the results of Biden, a zero personality against a hyperactive personality. I think Trump wins, but I don't think Biden's running. I'm almost sure he won't. He's going to be 82 years old. Yeah. He's going to be even more feeble than now.
Well, the action always follows the action. Tim Donner, thank you ever so much.
Love it. Love it. Thanks, Mark.
You're listening to Liberty Nation Radio. Later in the show, we're going to be asking why legally trained politicos are calling for federal charges against Karl Rittenhouse. But right after this short break, we're back with national columnist Sarah Cowgill to discuss constitutional sanctuary cities. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Sanctuary cities, a term that has come to strike fear into the hearts of those who believe in the Constitution and having national borders. We saw them pop up like gophers on the Caddyshack golf course over the last 4 or 5 years. And rather than being challenged, they were warmly welcomed and lauded by the Fourth Estate. But will the activist media have such love and affection for constitutional sanctuary cities and towns that are crafting laws to keep them true to the United States Constitution in the face of federal pressure? Well, no one has been following these events more closely than Liberty Nation's national columnist, Sarah Cowgill. Thanks for being here, Sarah.
Always my pleasure, Mark.
So tell me, Sarah, what's the deal with constitutional sanctuary cities?
Well, I think there's only one right now. Oroville, California. It's a small town, about 15,000 people. And they just decided to draw a line in the sand. They are tired of the federal government telling them what they have to do and who they have to fire. And if you don't get a vaccination, you can't do this. And if you don't do that, you can't do this. They're basically making a giant statement. I mean, for a small town, a giant statement about the need to keep out of, business, keep out of your business. I mean, we have a constitutional right to do what we want to do. We don't have the government telling us who we can hire or fire. We should not have the government trying to do that. And so they're fighting back. Where it's going to go, I'm not sure yet, but I'm keeping an eye on it.
Well, as you say, it's only happening in one place so far. But when we first heard of sanctuary cities for illegal immigrants, for example, it was just one or two places and then began to spread like wildfire. Do you predict the same for this?
Oh, absolutely. It's a great political message. Just like the 2A counties, when they were sanctuary counties for gun owners, we saw a new thing crop up in 2018. The Republicans lost the midterms. There was fear that it was going to be a mandate or just a rubber stamp all the way to the Oval Office on gun laws and stricter gun restrictions on who could own them. If you were accused of something, of a crime, and nobody knows if you committed it and you're still under, some kind of a trial system,
even without being aware that you're under some suspicion in some cases.
Exactly.
The red flag laws, yeah.
There was a very giant knee-jerk reaction for 2A proponents. And what they wanted to do was, say, hey, guns are safe here. Nobody's going to come knock on your door and take your gun. So you saw county sheriffs, duly elected officials, basically saying, we've declared our county a safe space for gun owners. And that popped up everywhere across this country. So here you are with a group that's saying, we don't want to be told what to do by the federal government and how to run our lives, run our businesses, to have our health care told what we were going to do if we're going to get a vaccination. The fun fact about Oroville is they didn't specify what federal mandates they would not follow. So it could be anything that the federal government decides to impose on them. It could be anything they want to say no to.
So do you think that we'll see, if, as you predict, these spread across the country, do you think we'll see an exodus of people from other places to these cities? I mean, it's something that we've seen from immigration sanctuary cities, folks fleeing to redder states and or municipalities. I mean, what's your prognosis here? Do you think there will be a movement of people as these things grow?
Well, it might keep some Californians in California, but they might just, go to a more rural or small town vibe, small community kind of thing. I think you're going to see them pop up in every blue state. I think you will see them pop up in every blue state. And whether or not they have any ability to, flip the bird to the federal government remains to be seen. I'm not a constitutional lawyer. That's a Scott Cosenza Esquire question that I just asked myself. But, I do think that you will see them take over, popping up, taking over, making statements, because it's a great political statement. Whether or not
very
they
much
can
a
enforce
political
it.
campaigning statement as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you'll see that soon enough.
It seems to me that while the immigration sanctuary cities, they kind of impact everybody, especially those who live in surrounding areas, because of course, criminal elements, they can just jump back across county lines for safety. And of course, someone who commits a serious crime can always just jump states, and they won't have retainers put against them. Whereas constitutional sanctuaries would only impact those people who want to follow the nation's founding documents, and those outside the jurisdictions wouldn't be affected at all. I mean, that's at least the way I see it. But as you just hinted at here, these places will likely face challenges from far and wide nonetheless, these challenges coming from the outside. What do you make of that?
Of course, they're going to have some blowback on this, but they're going to downplay it. They're going to say, well, we're the federal government and you guys are little tiny people and we don't, I think you might even see them ignore it for a while until it becomes something that's widely in the media. So, they know what's going on and they don't like what's going on, but they can't really do much about it. They look like the big bullies that they are. I mean, the federal government is always the biggest dog on the block. It's a statement, and it may be a statement that can't be ignored. Look at the social media following of Free Britney Spears from her conservatorship. Millions of people got involved in that. So if this catches fire, then it's going to be a big problem for the federal government, because you will see people popping up and doing their own thing and thumbing their nose at the Joe Biden administration.
It's not a good side of the argument to be on for the Biden administration, cracking down on areas that are declaring themselves constitutionally minded. It's just not a good look, whatever the legality of it. Now,
It is not.
Final question for you, Sarah.
Okay.
When cities and townships, they feel the need to make laws that protect them from the federal government, and the federal government impinging on their constitutional rights, doesn't that tell us that something is wrong with the system overall?
Yes, absolutely. Something's been wrong with the system overall for a while, and it's just continually, gradually, inching that boiling point. So I think, yes, all of these little things that are cropping up, the sanctuary here, the this, the that, the constitutional republic cities that are sure to follow Orville, yes, that definitely says we don't like what's going on, and we're going to make noise about it until we get this, government back under the people's control. It's not. And we are a government for the people, by the people. And right now it's not for the people and it's by the government.
And Sarah Calgo, we'll leave it on that note. Thank you ever so much.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. Good to see you.
You're listening to Liberty Nation Radio, heard across the Radio America network from our flagship station in the nation's capital, WWRC in Washington, D.C. Remember, you can tune in for Liberty Nation from 2 to 3 p.m. Sunday on KBKW 103.5 FM, 1450 AM, the talk of Grays Harbor. Coming up soon on the show, we'll be talking Liberty to figure out what went wrong with cash bail arrangements in Waukesha, Wisconsin. But next up, we're questioning Andrew Moran on the seemingly ludicrous decision to release oil from strategic reserves. Don't touch that dial. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Einstein said that the definition of insanity was doing the same thing again and again and expecting different results. Well, it seems someone should inform President Joe Biden of this tried and tested adage. While the United States dwells in the quagmires of inflation, he's once again opted for a more of the same strategy by reappointing Jerome Powell as head of the Federal Reserve, and with a progressive kicker to boot. Neil Brainard will be the vice chair of the central bank, an out-and-out progressive no less. Add to this plans to release oil from the strategic petroleum reserves, and we may have a recipe for disaster. Well, we're joined by economist and author Mr. Andrew Moran to figure out if this is a brilliant strategy or just more banging one's head against the wall. Thanks for being here, Andrew.
Thank you for having me.
So the decision to put Powell back in the Fed and Brainard at the central bank, what's the thinking behind this?
Well, when it comes to Jerome Powell, I think it's more about continuity. Now that the Federal Reserve is trimming its stimulus and relief programs, mainly the $15 a month in asset buying in the part of the pandemic era QE program, the idea is that since Powell started it, that he should end it as well. And this is something that the markets have cheered. They cheered when the announcement was made. When they announced, they did it before the opening bell, and the markets were happy about that because it creates a level of certainty now. You're not going to have a wild card like Brainerd running monetary policy and then, changing things around. So they like that. When it comes to Brainerd, I think it's more of a case of appeasing the progressives. She is a Democrat, yes, but most importantly, her policies are in line with, folks like the Squad. They were championing her appointment to the head of the Fed. She likes interventions. She likes the idea that the Fed should include climate change in its mandate. She likes CBDCs. So, she's an all-around interventionist, more of the same, more of progressive thinking. Even if Powell and Brainerd were not chosen, that another interventionist would have been appointed to the head of the Fed. That's just the way it goes in politics, whether it's a Republican administration or a Democratic administration.
Keynesians only need apply. So is this a future setup to get Brainerd into the higher spot where she'll continue to, for example, echo the policies that inflation is good but also transitory? Or is it perhaps a way of ensuring that Biden's legacy isn't tarnished by an abrupt volte-face further down the line with a new head?
Well, I'll go into that in a moment, but you're correct about the transitory line. She has a poor track record too. She also uttered the whole inflation's transitory, inflation's not going to be here, all that nonsense. So she has just as bad of a record as Jerome Powell in this. Now, when it comes to the long-term prospects of Brainerd, you're absolutely correct. This is more of a long-term move for Biden. Biden's essentially setting her up for that role in the future. Should the Democrats retain the White House in 2024 or the next go around whenever the Democrats, take charge of the executive branch again. There was a lot of talk before the announcement was made that he would promote her to the most powerful position in the world. All the markets were betting either between Powell and Brainerd. But I guess the agreement was that it's not her time, but she will have quite the influence at the central bank as Powell's right-hand woman. But unfortunately, she's going to be another Yellen incarnate. She's going to, and that's never a good thing, of course. She's going to have this. She's had all these years of experience in the Fed. She's going to one day run the Fed, then perhaps she'll be head of the Treasury Department. So she's a second coming of Janet Yellen.
Okay, so let's talk about oil for a moment. Oil is the big story for the week economically. With news that President Biden, he plans to release oil from the strategic reserves. Now, is this like former UK Prime Minister Gordon Brown selling off the nation's gold reserves at an all-time low and then claiming it as a masterstroke of financial management?
Yeah, that has to be one of the greatest boondoggles in modern UK history. Not only was the timing of the sales horrific, the reasoning behind the decision was just as idiotic. He was claiming that it was about diversification. He liked the volatility in gold markets. What the hell? Gold is a 5,000-year-old metal. Why the heck would you not want that in your portfolio as part of diversification? What was Brown thinking? So you tell me. So the Biden administration, they finally announced that they're releasing the 50 million barrels from the strategic reserves. He's pushing China, or China has done the same thing, but now he wants more coordination. Japan, South Korea, India, they're all working on plans in doing this. But I would note that this 50 million figure that the administration announced on November 23rd, that already includes 18 million barrels that were already authorized for auction. So this is more like a 32 million barrel fresh announcement. This is going to be a short-term fix for a structural problem. It's not going to make progressives happy because on one hand, he's only tapping into these reserves, but he also allowed the auction of 80 million acres of drilling on public land and water in the Gulf of Mexico. So that's not going to please progressives. It's still going to make oil more expensive. You saw that in the aftermath of the announcement, oil prices were rallying. It was remarkable to see the WTI contracts were up, I think, $2, and the natural gas was also up, I think, 5%. So this is not going to achieve much long-term pause for the energy crisis.
So the reasoning behind this is to give consumers a break at the petrol pumps, at the gas pumps. Mm-hmm. It doesn't look like that's actually going to work at all. So this is very short-sighted. I mean, they're called strategic reserves for a very, very good reason. Mm-hmm. Why isn't Biden just perhaps letting the pipelines reopen or granting the leases for the pipelines?
Well, that's a good question. It's just he's seeped in this ideological green energy, green economy transition. But what I find ironic is that he accused the oil and gas sector of price fixing. That he wants to investigate gasoline stations for not lowering the price of gas. But this is exactly what he's doing. He's price fixing. What the heck is going on in the administration? But yeah, most definitely, this is a short term. This is maybe, just maybe, provide short term relief. But there are so many problems of this from a basic economic standpoint. This move is going to artificially lower prices, fine. But it's going to increase demand because of the artificially driven decline. It's going to tighten supplies because of this artificially controlled demand. It's going to discourage production and exploration because of these lower prices. So this is just interventionism 101 that only, compounds these problems. Goldman Sachs, they came out with a research note just before the announcement. They were saying that any type of, releasing of the strategic reserves is going to raise prices in the long term. So if he wants to kill the U.S. oil and gas industry, this is the best way to do it. And one more thing too, the U.S. has been energy dependent under Trump for a few years, but now with these types of moves and with discouraging investment in domestic oil and gas, this is going to benefit OPEC in the long run. If OPEC just stays quiet in the next meeting, doesn't change anything, they're going to completely benefit from all these pumping of strategic reserves because it's going to add to the market. But once the well is dry, OPEC can just take advantage of the higher prices, and you see that with the higher prices going right now, despite the announcement. So OPEC, they're going to have their ministerial meeting soon, and they can just sit there and say, okay, we're not going to do anything. We're going to benefit from all this.
So final question for you, Andrew. Now, the president recently said that the people have more disposable income than ever before, even adjusting for inflation. That sounds good, right? But is there some devilment in the detail?
No, I was looking at the Bureau of Economic Analysis data on personal disposable income. It's down from its high in March, and only reason why it was high in March is because of the whole stimulus checks that were handed out to everybody. But overall, it's trending downward. It's at a 1-year low. Incomes are growing. That he's absolutely correct on that. But the cost of living is skyrocketing. Real wages are down across the board. I think the only industry that has seen real wage growth, which adjusts for inflation and with the higher hourly wages, is the leisure and hospitality industry. That's it. Everyone else is seeing a decline in real wages. Mining, logging, manufacturing, all these sectors are seeing real wages down. So I don't know where he's getting this idea that the personal disposable income is on the rise. So I guess that's just, I think a key component of Bidenomics is just fantasy.
Andrew Moran, thanks very much. Keep living the dream. Will Karl Rittenhouse face federal charges? And what went wrong in Waukesha, Wisconsin that led to the tragic deaths of 6 folks? We'll be right back. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio. If it seems to you that criminals have more rights than the law-abiding, you're not alone. We see Representative Rashida Tlaib push forward on her pet Breathe Act to release all federal convicts within 10 years and damn the cost. The suspected killer in the Waukesha, Wisconsin SUV attack was out on bail for jumping bail before the deadly events took place, and people are dragged through the courts for exercising their right to self-defense. What to make of it all? Well, someone who has both opinion and credentials in this area is Uprising podcast host and Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor, Mr. Scott DeCosenza. Welcome back, Scott.
Thank you, Mark. Pleasure to be here.
So tell me, Scott, when did criminals get more rights than regular folks, or am I just making a mountain out of a molehill?
The accused have rights that stand against the state, whether it's the federal authorities or state authorities. And that, I think, is the appropriate way to think about it. And for those of us who care about liberty, we have to always care about the rights of the accused and that they be honored.
So we all respect the rights of the accused as they're enshrined in the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, but it certainly doesn't feel that way nowadays, does it?
Well, we don't all respect those rights. I can guarantee you that the reaction, for instance, to the Rittenhouse case, I think, shows that to be true, where that Mr. Rittenhouse's rights were protected, for instance, by Judge Schrader, was seen by many on the left who campaigned for decriminalization and the rights of criminals who are actually convicted, somehow disfavor the rights of the accused when they have sort of negative political consequences regarding that, the obeyance of those rights.
Well, let's discuss the Karl Rittenhouse case briefly. Now, he was found not guilty on all charges, and yet we still have politicians in the media saying that he should have been found guilty. We even have Jerry Nadler saying that he should face federal charges. And then they argue that the justice system itself is broken. Now, this is the same justice system that put away Derek Chauvin for the murder of George Floyd. They were happy then. So is this just childish behavior when they don't get their own way?
I wish it were just childish behavior. It seems much darker to me than that. Gerald Nadler, I mean, it's one of those things, Mark, where he's a very smart man. So he has a law degree from Fordham University, a highly regarded law school. And I just don't believe that he made a mistake about whether or not certain evidence can be, admitted or not, and the value of this case. So either he's just read the headlines from a news that's curated without regard to the facts of the case, which may be possible. I don't want to dismiss that possibility.
Worrying, but possible, yeah.
Yes, or there's more malfeasance involved because Karl Rittenhouse, that he was acquitted, given the facts of the case, is no surprise. In fact, it's the only verdict that the facts really demand in the case. It's one of the most clear-cut cases of self-defense shooting that's ever been captured on videotape. So to suggest that case is emblematic of a problematic or miscarriage of justice, like Chairman Nadler of the Judiciary Committee said, is pretty problematic, Mark, in itself.
Yeah, there seems to be a heaping up of problems upon problems as far as let's call them what they are, the radical left are concerned, who want social justice rather than actual justice. Now, I want to briefly talk about bail. Now, the alleged killer in the Waukesha tragedy, the running down of a number of people with a red SUV for a Christmas parade. Now, that gentleman who is being accused, he was already out on bail for a number of crimes. One of these includes bail jumping. Now, it seems to me that setting a bail of just $1,000 was a severe tactical mistake. Now, assuming that the tactics here are designed to keep innocent people safe from criminal transgressors, what's your take on this?
Well, Mark, before I answer that, let me just say that I want to key in on what you said before you started your question about justice. And it's important to make clear that defendants in the United States of America must get and deserve individual justice. I recall somebody saying, what message does does the jury send to the nation with the Rittenhouse verdict? And like, hopefully none. Hopefully their message was not to send a message, but to judge the facts in front of them and rule on Mr. Rittenhouse's fate based on.
Surely collectivism is far more important in today's political climate, Scott.
Yes. So to the question of bail's simply used for ensuring appearance at trial. And if people aren't likely to jump bail, if they have not failed to appear in the past, or at least in the recent past, then it makes sense to give them bail that is just designed to do that. It's not designed to make sure they stay in jail until their appearances at trial.
But Mr. Brooks has broken the cause of his bail beforehand, correct?
Mark, I looked into this when his name became public, and it seemed to me that he was out in large part because of the failure of the system to be able to timely process his case because of the coronavirus shutdown. He demanded a speedy jury trial, as is his right under the Constitution, and the state wasn't able to provide it. And so that's what facilitated his release.
Now, call me conspiratorial if you will, Scott, but it seems to me that the same justice system that is dealing with the backlog, I believe it's over 1,600 cases in backlog at present, is the same one that is also is headed by the same people who are also calling for an end to incarceration, an end to cash bail overall. So wouldn't it be incumbent on them, if they were trying to dismantle the system from the inside, to almost guarantee that people do not get to have their speedy trials and therefore get out on low-level bail amounts?
Well, it's possible, Mark, but I don't think there's any evidence to suggest that that's what's happening.
Okay, so I want to talk a bit more about the increasing crime that we're seeing across the nation. Now, there's these massive looting sprees and thefts from stores that we're seeing. Criminals not being hunted down and arrested or charged unless they steal goods over $1,000 worth in value. Now, surely this is making of a new career criminal enterprise. For example, hear me out. Work 5 days a week, steal, let's say, $900 worth of goods per day, resell them on the streets for $500 if you can. This is tax-free income, by the way. That's about $130,000 per year, no tax, and still eligible for state and federal benefits. Now, my question is, if you're the type of person who would do this once, and then realize that you're not being pursued by the police, that you're not being criminally charged all the time, aren't you going to do this all the time and fast make your way into the top 1%?
Well, I think that you need to do a little bit more frequently than that to go to the 1%. That also, it's unlikely that somebody is willing to put in the grind, I think, probably to get that done. They wouldn't have chosen the life of crime to begin with. But also, then they might get into a conspiracy case or RICO case, which actually puts them way above that sort of low threshold for prosecution.
But surely that's only if they're Italian, Scott.
Haven't acted. So I wouldn't advise it to any client of mine who discussed changing jobs, perhaps to one of daily theft.
But what message does this send? That's my question. That people are not being prosecuted for the theft of goods up to $1,000.
Yeah, well, that's the society's value in that place, and they're free to make a change. I think we see a lot of people voting with their feet and getting out of places like that because they can't convince their neighbors that that's an unacceptable policy, or they've given up on it. So they're going to go ahead and, like I said, vote with their feet, and that's appropriate. But it's also appropriate for people who live in a place, if they don't want the police arresting folks for, it does take a lot of resources to arrest someone and process them, and it's impactful on the person who is arrested. So I think we would all agree. Well, maybe we wouldn't all agree, but I wouldn't like to see that done for something that's valued in a few dollars value, for instance, because of the cost involved, right? So if somebody steals a candy bar, we don't want to have the custodial arrest instituted because of the cost of that custodial arrest. But at the same time, when it escalates from a candy bar to an entire Louis Vuitton store inventory, well, that's a crisis, right? So where the line should be drawn between those two is up for each society to draw itself.
And we will leave you on that Jean Valjean, prisoner 24601 conundrum. Scott DeCosenza, thank you ever so much.
Cheers, Mark. Thank you.
And that's about it for this week on Liberty Nation Radio. I want to thank our guests, Tim Donner, Sarah Cowgill, and Andrew Moran, and of course our constitutional quarterback, Scott Cosenza. And most of all, as always, my sincerest thanks to you, the listener, for being here and taking part. I'll leave you with my parting shot for the day. It seems that despite the oft-worthy admonishment about being an armchair general, this president, this administration, and this Congress cannot put a step right. We sit at home and stare on aghast at decisions that appear detrimental to the country, whether that's releasing thousands of career criminals with zero repercussions, using up strategic petroleum reserves, gaming the electoral system, and by extension you, the voters, or even just threatening to upend the judicial system in a fit of whimsy. I'll remind you of what James Bond author Ian Fleming wrote. Once is happenstance, twice is coincidence, 3 times is enemy action. Hyperbolic? Maybe, but when we consider that every failed decision and, quote, unintended consequence, unquote, has been espied as leading to inevitable catastrophe, and that in the end proves true, it seems that there is a greater game taking place. One in which the tenets of the United States of America, once thought so strong, must first be destabilized. What better way to say we need criminal justice reform than to undermine that very system? What better way to push towards nothing but green energy than to make fuel prices so unaffordable that the public clamor for wind and solar initiatives? Perhaps it's time to ask if this administration is determined to build back better by first destroying what is already in place. Thanks for listening. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides. Who are we? We are Americans that believe in liberty. We are a project of the nonprofit One Generation Away. We are patriots who apply the founding principles to the issues of today.
And they keep moving the goalposts on us.
We are educators and commentators who love America and the Constitution. Who are we? We are Liberty Nation.